Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a fairly short video which is going to be a sneak preview of a blog post which I will probably be publishing sometime later in November, maybe in early December, about one of my surprise favorite subjects, which I have a whole playlist about, and I've added a lot of videos in particular to this over the summer. This is called How We Know Beatrice Sparks Was a Literary Fraud. And if you guys don't already know, if you're living under a rock or something, this fraud was the author of Go Ask Alice. She wrote almost all of Jay's journal. Those are her two most famous frauds by far, but the one book of hers which I have the most videos about to date is It Happened to Nancy, which she published in 1993, 94. You should just check out those videos I did, like 200 things wrong with that book, as well as like general thoughts and all sorts of other things. It's just this woman, she was just an infamous literary fraud. I can't say enough about how much I hate her. I'm horrified this crank got away with publishing Sorry Not Sorry, Mormon propaganda, fear-mongering as pretended real teen journals, pretended to be a psychologist. But anyway, let's just start getting down with it. I hate this woman so much, I just start ranting about her from the jump. While I enjoyed Rick Emerson's book, Unmask Alice, so much I read it twice, and I do have a video about that book as well in the playlist, one of my complaints, keeping my rating at 4 stars, was that he never really goes into any detail about just how the literary world came to figure out and accept the reality of Beatrice Sparks's decades-long game of pretend. He presents plenty of evidence showing her long history of fraud, obfuscation, and overall sleazy, shady behavior, but never anything about her little game definitively coming to light in another. Obviously, you can check out the video if you want a full blow-by-blow account of the book, but one of the main criticisms I had of the book, he provides absolutely no footnotes or bibliography. He just says, oh, everything is public record. You guys can just look it up yourself. Oh, you see the data, just dig that up on newspapers.com or your library archives if you want to verify it and read the full citation yourself. Or oh, the rest is just private conversations. I'm not gonna betray people's privacy by talking about that particularly because this is a book about a fraud and you're not providing any of your own citations. So obviously we know she was a fraud. I'm not doubting his research or conclusions or anything like that, but it's just kind of ironic there's no footnotes in a book about a literary fraud. Seriously. Since there was never an expose, like for other famous literary frauds, it seems like more of a case of lots of little things being pieced together over a long time than the truth being explosively revealed all at once. Still, it would have been nice if Mr. Emerson had spent more time talking about just how people figured it out. So how do we know Mrs. Sparks was a fraud? And this is just going to be 15 reasons why. I'm sure there are plenty more where those came from, obviously, and I have discussed pretty much, I believe, all of these things in detail in numerous of my prior videos, so I'm not going to go too off the rails and into the weeds in little eddies talking about all of these points blow by blow detail, but this is just going to be in general why we know she was a fraud, not about her crappy writing style so much, just reasons why people have been, able to figure it out. Number 1, she frequently used the exact same lines or very similar variations in her books. A compilation of these duplications, beyond just a handful of mentions, would have been great. Number 2, the U.S. Copyright Office lists her as the sole author for all but 2 of her books. The 2 exceptions are Kim Empty Inside, which I have not yet read apart from the Amazon preview, and Almost Lost, which I DNF'd about 7-8 years ago. It was so bad even by her standards, on which she presumably had another collaborator. I'm not going to even give her the grace, a crumb of credibility in saying, oh, maybe these were real diaries, or Almost Lost isn't even a pretend diary. It's a so-called case study of his Sammy, the ex-gangbanger, who doesn't talk anything like a former ex-gangbanger, his counseling sessions with Dr. Fraud, who's like Mr. Emerson says in Unmask Alice, this book is like a high-wire taunt. Oh, nobody can stop me. Screw you. I do what I want. She makes herself look like a superwoman, grand goddess of the universe in this book. Oh, I'm going to get Sammy off the streets, and off of drugs, and I'm going to get his parents back together, because we all know divorce is one of the worst things that could ever happen in all of like the world ever. Oh, and I'm going to get Sammy's dad off of the coke, and I'm going to do all these magical, wonderful things. Look at me all being Mary Sue. I'm so perfect. Oh, that book was just so bad, but I know I do have an obligation to go back and read it just so I can fully rip it apart for a review and a blog post and video. Number 3. Her archived papers at YBU's vault show evidence of her fraud and how she kept every draft. I went over that in a little bit in Unmask Alice. I also did some reading from that section of the book. This is also something I wish Mr. Emerson had spent more time exploring, for more than just Jay's journal. Like, what else did you find there in that the YBU archive? I am calling it YBU on purpose instead of BYU, because just think of what those letters spell out. YBU, because their restrictive dress code and honor code, like really rigid and repressive. So like, what else was in that vault besides the multiple drafts of Jay's journal, proving this was like she completely invented almost all of the entries in it, and she even doctored up some of the 21 real entries from the real life Alden Barrett, who he was the only of all the characters she ever created. His was the only journal that can be traced back to an actual person, and she only used 21 out of his, I believe, 67 in his real life diary. In the finished product, the Jay's journal has 221 entries, so that's basically like 10% or so of the entire book actually came from him. And she even doctored up some of his real life entries, which was like even more hurtful to the family than like the whole fakery and like making a satanic theme. Oh, I have so many more details about that in my prior video. So anyway, like, did he find drafts of like treacherous love, or it happened to Nancy, or Kim, empty inside, or Annie's baby, that book was such garbage, or Katie, not almost lost, I'm totally like finding Katie, like her books kind of all blend together, they're such crap. Number 4, we know what she did to Alden Barrett's family, and how she only used 21 of the entries from his real journal in the 221 entry book she published in 1977. I just was ranting about that. I was getting ahead of myself. The parents, the mother, particularly Marcella, she gave this Alden's diary to Dr. Fraud in 1977 after she read an interview about Go Ask Alice. Like many people, she was unfortunately hoodwinked. She believed Go Ask Alice was a real-life journal of a girl who died of drugs, and she thought, oh, this real-life doctor, psychologist, not knowing the truth pre-internet, can do wonders for my family. Maybe teens out there are hurting, and they will be stopped from taking their own lives if they read about what happened to my poor son Alden. And this fraud totally took advantage of the family. It was just, this alone like makes her a fraud, and we know she did this to the family. That alone is like evidence exhibit number 1 out of everything else that totally should have discredited her for the rest of time and eternity, as the morgue bots say. Thanks to her invention of a bizarre satanic theme and not changing identifying details very well, everyone in Pleasant Grove, Utah immediately figured it out and turned their wrath on the Barretts. And some of the details she didn't even change, or she just barely changed them at all, so you can figure out, oh, maybe this is standing in for this because, it's just a different color and type of animal, and it's just like a slightly different word in the school dance. And she changed the names of 3 of Alden's friends, but used their real names for another group of friends. Like, seriously, it's like writing a whodunit and like saying right on the first paragraph who actually did it. Number 5, as I was just saying, in all these decades, only one real person, Alden Barrett, has ever been linked to any of these real journals of troubled teens. No one else has ever come forth to say that was their friend, relative, student, neighbor, whatever, etc., or outed him or herself as the diarist. Like, imagine that. Number 6, this is one of the, totally ego trip, ego stroking narcissistic garbage. She appears as a psychologist with a clinical practice specializing in teens in many of her later books, yet no evidence of this practice or even a college diploma has ever surfaced. And I mentioned this in the Unmask Alice and another recent video, like Reasons I Hate Beatrice Sparks, she was so angry at esteemed literary critic Aileen Pace Nilsson, who is still living. Like she wasn't even like saying like a bad like hit job on her. She politely, respectfully interviewed her, and Mrs. Nilsson printed the truth. Oh, Beatrice was like not giving a straight answer about like her clinical training, like psychological like affiliations, her education. I couldn't find anything, and that Dr. Fraud was so angry she wrote off a letter to the literary magazine that had published this. How dare you? No proof of affiliations. I have a degree in psychology from all these 5 different schools. I've been clinically practicing for decades. Yeah, then why has no one ever found proof you graduated from any of these, like at least 5 different schools you claim to attend? You were not a real psychologist. That was a freaking crime. This fraud was only Dr. B in her own deluded mind, and she should have been in jail for pretending to be a psychologist, even on paper. That's against the law, even particularly in her own state where she was living at the time, Utah. Number 7, she was very obfuscatory and oppositional defiant with Avon Books during the production of It Happened to Nancy, dancing all around giving straight answers or compromising anything with a very childish, screw you, I do what I want attitude. I wish Mr. Emerson had covered the correspondence for her other late career books, and I was kind of disappointed about that. Like, I wish she had gone over all of these books, particularly because, like, obviously most people don't really care or know about the later frauds. They only care about the main 2 books, but that would have been, made it even, like, more detailed and, like, richer. We could have learned even more about this fraud and, like, why she was a fraud. So I just wish she had, like, gone into detail about more than just, like, the first 2 and a little bit about, voices. I haven't read that one yet either, and, them. It Happened to Nancy. Number 8. She couldn't keep her story straight about just how and when she met Alice, how she got Alice's diary, or how and when Alice died. Totally following in the footsteps, sorry not sorry, of her cult's founder, who gave at least 4 different versions of his so-called first vision. Maybe it's just like me, but if a freaking angel or like God appeared to me, I would remember every single detail of that encounter. I wouldn't keep changing my story radically every time I told it. Sorry, not sorry. I would not be surprised if in her remaining few books I haven't yet read, she finds a way to slip in some Joseph Smith worship, because, like, seriously. Number 9. Each and every book has an identical voice, style, and format. I've gone over this in many, many prior videos and blog posts. It's one thing to do this in fiction, or creative nonfiction, obviously, but she presented these as the journals of real-life teens. Even fiction writers with a consistent style create unique voices for each character. Oh, and like her particular fetishes were writing in all caps. Let's combine it with lots of italics and like 10 exclamation points in a row, and let's do it on an entire paragraph in all caps. And of course, all teen girls lovingly worship their mommies. Who ever heard of a teen girl having a difficult relationship with her mother? Let's just have a unrealistic Molly Mormon like character. Oh, it's so many. Oh, giving the time at the start of each entry, because everyone keeping a diary always does that, and just so many stupid things like the same turns of phrase. I wish Mr. Emerson had done more of like a comparison and contrasting between all these books, pointing in, oh, this line and variations of this line, it appears in all of these books. This exact type of writing style is in all of the books, not just saying, oh, they all read like first drafts. You liked exclamation points and stuff. Well, like, show us some more examples. Like, don't just spend almost all of your time talking about the main 2 books and the moral panics which they inspired, or maybe that could even be a subject for a whole different book. Number 10. Likewise, the supplemental material in the back matter is written in exactly the same style. Surprise, surprise. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to make that connection. Like, for example, the exclamation points, the writing in all caps, the over-the-top dramatics, and in Annie's Baby, she had the exact same morally offensive anti-welfare rants. Oh, I hated that book so much. Annie is constantly ranting against welfare. Oh, it's horrible. Teen moms are only getting pregnant over and over to game the system. They just want a nice little meal ticket. Welfare is horrible. Just pull yourself up by the bootstraps like people in the Victorian era. You get screwed and sent to the poorhouse. What a surprise, Dr. Fraud has the exact same like anti-welfare ranting in the back matter of Annie's Baby. Number 11, my lucky number. All of her characters use a suspicious amount of very Mormon-specific language. Even the supposedly Catholic Nancy, who reads nothing like any Catholic I have ever known or heard about, even like a questioning or doubting or lapsed or cafeteria Catholic. Yeah, I wonder why. Like, obviously, that's a rhetorical question. Alden Barrett was Mormon, so it makes sense his real entries would have such references, but there's no such excuse with any of the others. She doesn't even establish them as being Mormon, like, writing in an entry, oh, today we went to Ward XYZ, and the bishop talked about this, and it was fast in testimony. I would have had a crumb of respect for Dr. Fraud if she had just made them Mormon instead of pretending otherwise. Number 12. None of her teens sound like actual teens, either in general or from their decade of origin in particular. They all sound, surprise, surprise, like conservative 70-year-old Mormons preaching at General Conference. Even a genuinely conservative, religious, and or old-fashioned teen of the 1990s would sound exactly like that. Not someone with such views who came of age in the 1930s like Dr. Fraud, but she was expressing views that were like common in her generation the way people in the 30s would have expressed them. And again, all the other things, like, for example, teens typically don't use million-dollar vocabulary words, particularly when they otherwise are written like total airheaded ditzes who don't like school and they're scared by big books, or they use like euphemistic words. Like, for example, she constantly uses the word bum when most teens in the 90s would say ass or butt, and she, like, all these other, like, let gas, like, who uses that word? Even I don't use that word. Just all these, like, stupid expressions no real teen would use, particularly in the 90s in the US. Number 13. Teen girls, surprise, surprise, are kind of famous for hating their mothers. Like, who would have thunk that? Find me one well-adjusted teen girl, not someone who is, like a lot of like trauma, or she's like much younger than her age for like various reasons, or she has like, God forbid, some kind of like mental condition or a developmental disability that obviously makes her not like the, typical teen, like neurotypical, whatever you would expect her to like act and talk like, but a well-adjusted teen girl who's constantly proclaiming her wub for her precious, precious, precious mommykins, and using ridiculous lines like, I'm so glad my dear, sweet, precious mom is my dear, sweet, precious mom. Like, seriously, she uses that crap in like every one of her books that I can, like, that I remember reading. Or calling her mother my precious forever mama, like Nancy does, like a gag. Like, who freaking talks like that? As I've said in several previous videos about this fraud, this is basic psychological concept. Something has gone very wrong in an adolescent's development if they're not pulling away from parents by being a teenager, the teenhood, and seeking like independence, like don't want to be near the parents. Like, parents are notoriously uncool when you're a teenager, so like something has gone wrong in the attachment if you are still like close-knit, tied at the hip, like lovey-dovey, all like no life outside of your parents. Oh, I prefer spending time with mommykins. Who cares about those stupid teens? Like, hanging out with a woman in her 40s or 50s is so much cooler. Mommykins is my BFF. She was totally out of touch with like everything about reality. She didn't understand teenagers, like, and she claimed to be a psychologist. This is a well-known like psychological like concept. Like, total idiot. Number 14. Her books read like formulaic morality plays, with a set beginning, middle, and end, not actual real-life journals. Like, who would have thunk that? Real life doesn't neatly go from point A to point Z, and real diarists mention many things going on in their lives instead of solely focusing on one big issue. Like, none of her diaries I have read, I don't remember any of them mentioning like current events, like, oh, there's a presidential election, obviously, because that one just happened. Oh, or there's like, some big major news story. Like, I was a teen in the 90s. I could tell you so many things like her diarist should have been mentioning if they were real like, people, like, the 1994, like, Olympics and the whole like ice skating scandal, or just any of the like anything like happening in the 90s, the LA riots, the OJ Simpson case. Like, seriously, we're supposed to believe like teens in the 90s never mention anything outside of their problems. They have no reactions to world events, or even, oh, I saw this like movie on TV, or this is my favorite show, and like, oh, my friends and I were all talking about the very special episode last night, or I like watching this soap opera when I come home from school. It's the only soap opera I can watch because it's the only one that starts after like school ends, and this is my favorite character. Oh, I'm reading this book. Oh, I love this is my favorite series. Oh, I'm into the Babysitters Club. Like, anything to give them like personalities and interests outside of their like problems. Like, I mean, seriously, they have absolutely no character development. And number 15, which I previously touched on and ranted about earlier. Not only do her teens not sound like actual teens, they don't act like real teens either. They're all unrealistic goody-goodies who only get into trouble because they're tricked, drugged, raped, exploited, taken advantage of by bad kids. Never do they exhibit any free will or moral agency, and there are only disastrous consequences for doing anything not 100% G-rated, like, oh, premarital sex. It always leads to terrible diseases that are going to kill you, or if you don't get a disease, you'll get knocked up, and if you're a good little girl, you'll give the baby immediately to a nice married white and delightsome couple who ideally lives 3,000 miles away, so you never have to think about that mistake again. Just focus now on finding a Peter priesthood who doesn't mind marrying someone who's not a factory sealed virgin. It's just so offensive. Like, none of her characters, they don't act like teens. They don't like choose their situations. Oh, no good kid would ever voluntarily have premarital sex, and that can only have dire consequences. No teen would ever even like do a couple of joints just to see what it's all about, or like take psychedelics in a controlled environment in a a safe psychedelic community, or do anything that's not like Disneyfied crap. Oh, I hate this woman so freaking much. Thank you very much for listening all the way through to the end. Please leave me a comment letting me know, have you ever read any of Dr. Fraud's books? Have you known about her fraud? Did you, like myself, feel like angry and tricked when you found out these were not real teenagers whom you like felt for when you were like too young to know any better? Have you read Rick Emerson's book Unmask Alice? What are your opinions on other literary frauds, or just anything else in general? Anyway, I do like seeing like nice respectful comments so I can have like conversations and build friendships on booktube, and I am in arrears for like getting back to comments because of all my writing and editing duties as of late, but I hopefully will get back to them soon and like belatedly answer those nice comments. So thank you guys again very much for watching. I will see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.